Well, pleasant evening, and you are in the press room. Students from several schools across the country and workers from various institutions donned our orange garb and carried placards last Friday in an effort to raise awareness and advocate for an end to violence against women. The Orange Campaign followed 3 weeks of gruesome murders in St Vincent, the Grenadines, including the killing of 2 females, 17-year-old Precious Williams and 42-year-old Luann Roberts, whose bodies were found stuffed in a bag and in the backseat of a car, respectively. Last Friday's Orange protest was not the first to have happened here in recent times. On February 6, 2020, hundreds of people dressed in orange marched through Kingstown to protest the murder of slain Cuban-born nurse Arianna Taylor. So the question is, after the orange marches, what next? What is at the root of the problem? What can we do to bring about sustainable change? And to discuss the topic, we'll be joined in the press room by attorney and former government minister, the Honorable Rene Batiste, veteran church leader, Pastor Cecil Richards, school and clinical psychologist, Ms. Alyssa Alves, and business executive, Ms. Gail Branch. So when we come back, we dive right into the topic with our esteemed panel, and we'd want you to go on our Facebook, Searchlight's Facebook page, on our YouTube channel, like it and share it. And remember, in the very last segment, we'll be sharing some of your questions with the panel. So we'll be right back in the press room.
I'm Shanika John, Chief Health Promotion Officer acting in the Ministry of Health, Wellness and Environment. Since St Vincent and the Grenadines started administering the COVID-19 vaccines, we've encouraged persons from different age group, different risk factors to get vaccinated. For those persons who have contracted the COVID-19 virus, vaccinated or unvaccinated, the severity and the impact of the virus is significantly different. If you've not yet considered getting the vaccine, I encourage you to do so today. Get vaccinated.
Well, welcome to all. Welcome to the press room, and a special welcome to the members of this esteemed panel, Dr. Alves, the Honorable Renee Baptiste, Ms. Branch, and Dr. Richards. It's good to have you all in the press room. And
My pleasure.
Thank you.
as we discuss this troubling topic, something that must be discussed, but I think we'd all wish we didn't need to discuss something like this: violence against women. And as we said in the intro, we are looking beyond the orange. So let me start by asking you all of you, what was your first and most lingering thought after the recent killings, the two that we mentioned, the teenager and the other woman that were killed? And then, it led to this outpouring of concern and protest action and awareness, and people were speaking about it. What lingered the most, or what has been lingering in your mind on the issue? Each one of you. Dr. Richards.
Because we have been here so many times, Mr. Jackson, I immediately thought and voiced on my radio program my concerns about the numbing down with reference to the Overton window. The fact that we can, over a period of time, drip, 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 become so used to something that it becomes pretty much norm. And with the recent, the two that you mentioned, but alongside that, I think around the same time, there were a number of murders of men. And it seemed to me that, and my immediate concern was that this society is going to become numb if we're not careful. We are going to hear it often enough that it's just not going to impact us the way it used to.
Ms. Branch?
As Dr. Richards said, the fear of us becoming inured to this level of violence and the constant, there's always something in the news these days. And me in particular, the murder of Precious Williams, it hit a nerve because to me, her name, Precious, somebody thought at birth, when she was a baby, somebody thought she was a precious life. Her name was Precious. And for her to come to such a vicious and violent end. So, to touch our topic, how do we prevent this from happening to somebody else's Precious?
Ms. Baptiste?
Oh, thank you very much, Kirby. It's good to be here. When I heard of the two recent murders against the Precious and the counselor, immediately when the one for Precious arose, my mind went back to Lakeisha, the young lady who was found hanging about maybe 20 years ago. And I felt so distressed that we can't come to this path again. And then the counselor was found killed. Again, it's what's happening to us as a people. It used to be that these things we had to say that it never used to happen like this. And now it's happening a little too often. And of course, as Dr. Richards indicated, what happened to the young boys, the young men who were killed. And we have to be very careful. I think that we have to go back again and do a sustained campaign of building awareness, of education, because we do it when this happens, we get so shocked, so we start working on it again. But I think it has to be a sustained campaign. The way that you put on an ad for toothpaste, it's always there. You're seeing it all the time, so it's hitting you in the back of your head. Maybe we need to do that because since 2015, we've had new legislation, we've had expansion in the family court services, social services, but I think we have to do, not just leave it to the government or government agencies, but more of the NGOs have to hit the pavement again in the education process and the awareness process.
Okay. Dr. Alves.
I think that the thought that I really had when everything happened was starting from Luann's death, and then of course being underscored again by Precious's murder, was the question of what is the role that all of us have. So I think that it makes us feel comfortable when we can say, oh, these are vicious, heinous acts committed by some person who's from some sort of aberrant part of society, when in reality they're not. I mean, these the murders that we've seen, yes, those are heinous and awful, right? But there are mundane acts of discrimination and sexism that lead to these things that happen daily. And there is abuse that is happening that people are withstanding silently. And in a lot of cases, we're complicit to that silence, and we're complicit to the creation of the people who become perpetrators.
Yes.
So that's what I was curious about, in terms of our agency as a society. What is our role in not only holding persons accountable who have perpetrated these sorts of acts, but also holding ourselves accountable for our role in potentially creating environments where these things can flourish.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. And it's a good place to launch off, because my next question would be that, apart from the murders, and we know how heinous those were, how grave is the issue of violence against women? And we're really starting there. In violence and abuse towards women, how serious is the issue in St. Vincent and the Grenadines? Is this just a matter of once in a while there's a murder and so everybody gets up in arms? Is there a real societal problem? And if so, what is the problem?
I would like to say, first of all, that the way you frame the question would seem to suggest it's a problem in St. Vincent. It's not really a problem in St. Vincent. Anyone who would care to look at the stats and they're available on different links that you can find out what's happening to women in many repressive countries. And St. Vincent is not the worst where this is happening, but it is happening here. So we have to focus on our own backyard. And to your question, the ugly incidences of late are but a tip of the iceberg. And counselors probably would know better and have a better feel of what's happening to women. Let's talk about St. Vincent. Whether you're in the family court or in the counseling system, or you in the pastoral profession as I am, we get a more close-up view almost on a daily basis. We hear horror stories that don't make the newspaper. And I think Dr. Alves said it best, the silent abuses that are taking place for multiplicity of reasons that women are quiet about. One of the most startling statistics that I have come across related to women in Caribbean and Latin America is that over 70% of them have suffered some form of abuse at one point or the other in their life, either from early childhood up to their adult life. So the majority, and if I can't recall the source, but I only use reliable sources, and that is a staggering thing. So we are not talking about a problem that is incidental. We are talking about something that is perhaps pervasive in countries around us, including St. Vincent.
You know, I'm wondering, Dr. Richards, if you are peeping into my notes, because that stat came from the United Nations, actually. Miss Simba Bajos made mention of that 70% of women having been
Yes,
victims of some
yes,
gender-based violence. All right. Now,
yes, and
you spoke about the silent suffering. Uh, the Honorable Ms. Batiste, why are our women suffering in silence? And the rest of
Because
you can
they're
chime in on
ashamed.
this also.
Because they're ashamed.
Mhm.
They feel that they've let somebody down. They feel that they're not strong enough to fight this and they'll have to fight it on their own. And there's some people who don't even know they're being abused. And so that's why I thought I would pull out from their legislation, the Domestic Violence Act, the definitions, because we need to know what it is. Domestic violence is any controlling or abusive behavior that harms the health, safety, or well being of a person or child and includes, but is not limited to, physical abuse or threats of physical abuse. There's some people who say, well, he could always threaten as long as he don't hit me. So they don't know that threatening is also an act of domestic violence. Sexual abuse or threat of sexual abuse. Emotional, verbal, or psychological abuse. Economic abuse. Intimidation. Harassment. Stalking. Damage to or destruction of property. Taking the woman's cell phone and mashing it up. Eating up her microwave, burning up her clothing, burning up her bed, entry into an applicant's residence without consent, where the parties do not share the same household. And then there are series of definitions of what economic abuse means, what sexual abuse means, what harassment means. And harassment is also getting a friend to phone the wife or the girlfriend and breathe.
Understood. Yeah.
Uh, so they say you can't know, but that is also, it's called repeatedly making telephone calls or inducing another person to make a telephone call, whether or not conversation ensues. Repeatedly sending, delivering, or causing delivery of letters, packages, faxes, emails to the person.
So,
Harassment, watching, loitering, going by the bus stop, throwing bad word, being late to the place of employment, and harassing. All of these are, in fact, acts of domestic violence. But the ones that really get to most people is when there is physical or sexual abuse, not just the threats. But that's
so,
the
so,
ones that get to that.
so good. Hearing you outline that is really good. But the question now, and I want us to dive deeper into this. What are some of the other reasons? You know, why do our women feel that they must suffer in silence? Because when that statement was made, I wrote it down immediately. Silent suffering.
Because they're
No,
the court of public opinion. Because
Exactly.
when you make a report, you will have to substantiate it and justify, and you will have to be an ideal victim for anybody to countenance your story.
Yeah. So
You'll be
many
asked
women.
questions. Why were you there? How were you dressed? What were you doing?
Exactly, Alicia.
pause.
I would say
Before you jump in, Ms. Branch, I just want to
Mhm.
ask Dr. Alves to just elaborate on that statement about an ideal victim.
Yeah.
And then Ms. Branch, you
People
can take it away.
demand, people demand that you be, and there has to be an ideal victim. And I don't even like that word, ideals. I prefer survivors to victims, right? an ideal survivor, and an ideal type of perpetrator. So people, for example, have real difficulty with assessing situations that have to do with people who know each other really well. But the vast majority of people who are assaulted know the person who assaulted them. It's not the stranger who comes out of the bushes at night. It's the friend. It's the father. It's the uncle. It's the cousin. It's the community member. And then, it's the husband, right? So when people have to actually hold in their minds the idea of, oh, you were in a situation where you thought you could be safe, and then this person made a decision to assault you. I still do not think that we have good vocabulary around that in the Caribbean. I mean, there have been efforts actually to assess persons in the Eastern Caribbean, adults, to see where people stand on victim blaming. And in the Eastern Caribbean, the average is around 70% of they're asked questions around, oh, do you feel as though the woman in the situation had some responsibility for what happened to her? People say yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Miss Branch, you wanna chime in there?
Yes, because like Elisa said, so many women are afraid to come come forward to say that they're victims of abuse because of the judgment. And again, the victim blaming. What were you wearing? What did you do to provoke him? Why did he do that? Were you drinking? Or did you have too much to drink? They're afraid to come, and then they have to bear the burden of proof. People, oh well, no, maybe that person told a lie. So one of the things that I gathered, we have to share a safe space for conversation where someone can trust us to come to us to let us know what is going on. And without judgment, we should listen. And there are 4 sentences that we can tell them. I believe you. I stand with you. This is not your fault. You don't deserve this. We need to give our women and girls a safe space without judgment, that they can come and let someone know what is going on. And another thing, I'm coming back to what Renee said. So we have all of these laws, and they're very straightforward and very plain. What are we doing? What is the recourse for a victim of abuse? How do we train police officers and the people that they have to report these incidents to? How do we take this law and help victims? Because the law, I wasn't even aware. The law is, I mean, it's very straightforward, and it's set out. There are so many different, and as Renee said, abuse is not just physical. There's so many different levels of abuse. So we have to educate our girls and women to recognize the signs of abuse, but we also have to educate our police officers and our counselors, to be support and to know how to deal with victims without judgment, and so that they can know it's a safe space to report this abuse and to stop it before it gets too precious.
There's a unit in the police that deals with, there's a sexual offenses unit, and there are persons who are trained. Seminars are held. The British government has given money to prepare and teach and train. A number of my colleagues have done this training for officers. And the family court has trained counselors, people who work with victims, people who work with other persons who are applicants, but not necessarily the victims, the way the law is set out. And I can tell you that I'm impressed with the work that is done by the staff at the family court. They are very empathetic. They're very sympathetic. They sit and work with people, because I've had to take people there. I had to assist people. And I was really impressed with the way the patience, they use the language that the people can understand, because sometimes we have a tendency to speak in a particular way, but say, What does that mean? You have to be able to communicate to the persons who have come to seek advice and so on from you. And there is a card that is supposed to be given to you. And the Bar Association printed a couple hundred of these way back in 2016, which outlines, it's in the law, but it outlines, you give this to the person, it outlines all the rights, not just to the person who is the victim, but who is also the applicant. What are your rights? And it is in fairly plain language what the police officer is supposed to do, how the police officer is supposed to assist, and so on.
Dr. Richards,
Yeah, yeah, yes, go
you
ahead.
stand from that unique position. Also, I know as part of your pastoral ministry, counseling is a deep part of that. I want to really get your view as to the silent suffering and what are some of the challenges that women face, and from your experience.
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked. I would say that the two things that I would like to highlight, shame and second chances. Because you prefaced and asked earlier, why a woman silent? And a woman is very guarded about her. Some women are very guarded about their character and dignity and name. And you may have seen some women who dared to make public what they're going through. And our society is not generally sympathetic towards women. You really run a high risk in letting your private good be known. In studying the victimology, and I don't like the word victimology, Dr. Alvis, I'm with you on this, but that's a term, especially in sexual molestation situation. The three Ds, that women are, the disbelief that they have to, first of all, encounter. That's a big hurdle. It's a societal hurdle. And then there is the disregard. So it's not only the disbelief, but you disregard what they say and look for other stories and other narratives. And then ultimately they're dismissed. And women know that our societal constructs are such that they don't really stand much of a chance. There's a lot of shame, even when you have not been at fault. And women, I would hesitate to even suggest that women can be at fault in these things, Mr. Jackson and panel. But hear me well. There's a lot of blame and shame on the woman. And once a woman says that my boyfriend beats me, or my boyfriend treats me this way, or he checks my phone, she is basically belittling herself. And this is what I have found in the narratives and in counseling, that this is how the woman feels, that to tell others, to let it be known that this is what I go through, because she is thinking that other women are not going through this, so I must be the bad one here. So there's a lot of shame, and women would much rather stifle that shame. There's also the issue of second chances, that very quickly, especially when a woman says, "Okay, I'm gonna go further with this," that the man is very repentant, and he says, "I'm sorry." He will say he is sorry, and the woman gives second chances, and really a lot of abuses get stifled because the woman is continually giving the man another chance. And these are you asked Mr. Jackson, what have I experienced? This is what I have experienced in counseling, that women are not they will prefer to bear it rather than put it out there and be made to feel ashamed. And also they think that by giving chances that the guy is going to do better. So these are two huge hurdles, societal, that we're going to have to overcome.
Well, I hate to do this, but we must take a break. We'll be right back in the press room, and we'll be picking it up from that very point with our esteemed panel. All right, so we'll be right back.
I got my COVID-19 vaccine and my booster shot to ensure that I am protected. I've never been tested positive for COVID-19, and even if I did contract the virus, I've never been sick. And I'm confident that the COVID-19 vaccine significantly contributed to that. The vaccines are safe, they are effective, and they're one of the ways that we can navigate this pandemic together. If you've not yet considered vaccination or getting your booster shot, I encourage you to do so today. Get vaccinated.
Searchlight Online, now stronger and better, and with more options for everyone. Download the free app and access the e-paper and breaking news. Check out our e-papers read aloud and translation features. Read our e-paper in different formats, even when you are offline. Access our online archive as far back as 2005. Only interested in viewing ads? Go directly to our print ad marketplace. Subscribers get exclusive access to a full-color midweek e-paper edition, in addition to the weekend edition. Affordable monthly, quarterly, biannual, and annual e-subscription plans. Book, submit, and pay for advertisements online. Go to www.searchlight.vc for more details. Searchlight, journalism you can trust. Now stronger, better, and with more options for everyone.
Welcome back in the press room, where we are diving into some really choppy waters as we look at going beyond the orange, beyond the protests, and looking at violence against women. When we left for a break, and we want to encourage you to send in your questions in the very last segment, we will be asking some of your questions to the panelists. And also, please like and follow us on Searchlight's Facebook and YouTube account, and share it so that others can join in on the discussion. Now, Dr. Richards, you made the point about second chances, and I want to throw this out to Dr. Alves now. Why are we so prone, and when I say we, I mean women, are so prone to giving these second chances? You know, Dr. Richards was talking about the shame and all that, but that second chance, what's the root of that?
So I'm glad that you're asking me, because while Dr. Richards was talking, I thought actually, you know, that there is sometimes something toxic happening. Like, on the one hand, there may be some women who are thinking, oh, I'm the only person that this is happening to. But I actually think that there's quite a few women who very much think that this is absolutely just what happens to everyone. And that drives some of the lack of reporting and the bearing it, like the relationships look like. So, for example,
is it normal? Like saying it's normal,
right? So, but a lot of us grew up in houses where it is. My grandfather beat my grandmother. He did. And a lot of people grew up in houses like that. Their parents watch their parents watch their parents have domestic violence in their homes, and so on and so forth. And you repeat and you recapitulate those things over and over again. And it seeps into what we think of as like, oh, that's just how you do things. There are people who will go so fast and say, oh, well, because for some people, that's what love looks like. And that's what they think love looks like. Or they think love looks like control, for example. It's like, you know, that sort of desire to know what a woman is doing, where she's going. Well, actually, I shouldn't even just say women. I think that on both sides of the gender spectrum, there are people who have really, they've got misconceptions about what love looks like. And a lot of it looks like power and control. And so that's what keeps people locked into cycles and not leaving. And of course, there's other things as well. You know, there are things like economic dependency. I mean, if we really want to have a conversation about the drivers of some of what we're seeing, we actually really have to talk about gender roles and gender norms and what freedoms women do or do not have. Because some women are locked into situations, or they feel as though they're locked into situations that they cannot escape. And it's partially because they don't have the same economic freedoms. It's partially because of things like, let's paint a picture. Let's say you have a girl. She's 14. A man expresses interest in her. You know, maybe she comes from a household where she doesn't have a lot of things to herself. Not necessarily abject poverty, but she doesn't have much. And a man starts showing interest in her. He's maybe 10 years older. He starts buying her things, right? He makes her feel special. He starts sleeping with her. She gets pregnant. Who is going to be affected by this? Not him, her. She's going to be able to school. Depending on the degree of support that she has, will she continue her education? Will she not? In a lot of cases, she won't. So now she's going to be a young mother with a baby without so much as a high school education. She'll most likely join the informal economy, because that's probably going to be the types of jobs that give her the flexibility to look after a young child as well, depending on, again, the degree of support that she has. Who knows? Maybe she gets involved with another man. Maybe he says, well, I ain't going to look after another man's child. So she gets pregnant for him. So now she has two. And so on and so forth, and on and on and on.
Okay. Yeah.
And I know it doesn't seem connected to, but it's all of a piece in my mind.
Yes. It's funny, Elisa, because I was just talking about that this week, where you have, and I saw that a lot growing up in a small village, where this whole aspect of the economic dependence, and these women get into this vicious cycle, and you have a child and you don't know how to support that child, and you go and you get involved with another man, and you have another child, and before you know it, you have 6 children with 6 different fathers, and no father is helping. And the abuse, you know, whether it's physical, but the whole abuse just perpetuates. And you were talking about growing up in homes with abuse, and we also have to address not just abuse of parents and spouses. We have to have a conversation around the corporal punishment that is meted out in our homes and in our schools, that children are absorbing this level of violence, because we know that in some of these homes, the way the parents beat their children, and the way that some children, the way some teachers beat their children, and these children absorb this. This is how they react. This is how they react to conflict. This is what they learn. That, to me, you would have someone coming to a parent's home and complaining that Johnny hit Michael, and the parent's reaction to that would be to beat Johnny. What are you teaching Johnny? That you know, you're beating him to tell him not to hit. And you know, intergenerational transmission that Elise is talking about, where you absorb this in your home. So you think this is normal. You think this is normal. You think this is a normal way of being. And as Dr. Richard said, so you keep going back. You keep going back because you don't know that there's any different. So I'm sorry.
Okay. And before we continue there, I want to get Ms. Batiste to comment on this. And I'm sticking a pin on what you just raised, Ms. Branch, because we're gonna go there. But you know, we are looking at what Dr. Alves was saying about the whole concept of it becoming normal. And when I listen to you speak about what's in the law, the question is, and then we were talking, and she was given that whole discourse as it relates to poverty and making several children and that can lead. But there are professional women like yourselves who have been successful, who can take care of yourselves, who can manage your own financial affairs, and you hear the stories, superstars and people who are of good profession, good economic standing, who are still victims of domestic violence and stay in that type of situation. What do you think are the factors that will contribute to that side of the story?
I think
Yeah,
that
because
this is the person who can best look at that psychological profile of those types of individuals who are successful, who are well educated, and they are victims of abuse or remain in relationships where there's abuse. As she says, you know, every plant starts from there's a root. There's something that happened a long time ago, and that frame, the person is in that frame, and so I think that if I remember a couple of years ago, they were doing a lot of programs on family life education. And as a serving MP, I went and I sorted out, I went, and I said, I have to find out, I want to get some information from the Ministry of Social Development. And there were programs there. And as an MP, people come to you with different problems. And I said, let's have this little workshop and group people so they can sit and talk and find out what are the problems they face and young mothers and so on. And it is important that persons who have tools, when you recognize this, to try to educate people. So what's supposed to be good behavior and what is not good behavior? What is criminal behavior? What is behavior that is against the law? It's against your emotional well-being. And also we had to teach, there were some persons whom you had to tell them, we're very good at, lady told me when I went to visit her in prison, she said that people keep telling me all the time what I did wrong. And you're the first person who asked me a question and how best can I deal with this situation when I come out? You're the only person asking about my children. And so we have to find a way to read, to educate ourselves and educate others, help them through that process. It is not an easy job. It is not an easy calling when you have to work with people. And sometimes people do get tired, worn out in working with people, but it is something that we'll have to do. It is something I know that a couple of years ago too, I was exposed to some training during the professional week for teachers, when teachers were exposed to things that happen in the classroom and how best, what tools to use, how to interact with children, how to speak and separate and the confidentiality that children expect and so on. Because you do have in situations where people, they want to speak, but they are afraid that somebody would release their business, and you have to give them that assurance of confidentiality. So it is a all hands on deck sort of approach. You're not going to solve all the problems. You're not going to solve them in a month, a week, a year, 10, 20 years. But if we started someplace and try to sustain that, but I know that after a couple, 2-3 community outings, 2-3 radio programs, everybody goes back to the little shelters and where they're comfortable, and these people have a problem. But in my experience, I have met women who were brave enough to go to the family court. They are women of all different levels of society, and they say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it, and let me see what's going to happen. But somebody has to also be there, like a buddy, to help them, to sit there and give them that assurance they're not alone, that support. And I've seen women, one woman told me, I grew up literally on the street, and I can't allow this to continue to happen to relatives and family members. And I have to break the cycle. She was ostracized for doing it, but she did it. And she felt a sense of relief that she had done it. She's not of massive means, but she found a way, what can I do to help myself economically to see things through? It takes a lot, but society, it is high time that all Vincentian society do 3 things. Stop the victim blaming, find a way to support. And don't just say that you're going to be goody two shoes. It's not that. You have to support people. And there are organizations throughout St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I think we have reached a point where we know what is the problem. Don't keep on it. Try to find avenues of solution. And I know that sometimes when people face certain situations, especially in the higher middle class bracket, upper middle class bracket, people they are ashamed, and the shame takes a very long time to be worn down because they get so battered by their relatives. And we need to understand what that person is going through emotionally and how best to support them. And don't feel that, oh, we're so privileged that different things can't touch us. We don't know. Sometimes it could reach you.
Let's look at some areas that people have already identified, and questions are asked as to those things contribute to violence against women and violence in a holistic way. Of the way that we were raised as a society and religiously also, the role of a man as head of a home, the whole idea of submission.
Women being submissive, yes.
Right. Is it that we have taken a religious concept and twisted it? Dr. Richards, help us understand that aspect of it, because one of the questions when you talk about forgiveness, the whole idea that's your husband. Submit to your husband. We have all been taught that, and anyone who have been through church in any level have learned that as a doctrine or as a way of operation. So does this contribute? Is it just that we have walked the concept of it? You can lead off, Dr. Richards.
I think there are a lot of misconceptions there, but I'm glad that you asked that because it will clear up the myth, actually. People who have good, strong religious and even biblical understanding would, in a heartbeat, say to you, there is no way you can construe any of the biblical teachings to promote violence and in particular violence against women. In fact, to be fair, if you were to follow strictly the biblical teachings, you would find that to be quite an antidote to violence. The people who have a good, strong biblical background would find that values of respect and values of love, Mr. Jackson, and values of kindness and forgiveness. I'm getting a feedback there. Things that you turn the other cheek. They are at their very core. They are on the other end of the spectrum of being violent. So I think the Bible, and because you introduced the topic and question what the Bible promotes, I would segue off that to say the Bible does promote that interpersonal kind of relationship that would take violence to the other extreme. In fact, Romans 12:19 says, when people hurt you, just don't go taking vengeance. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. That same passage in Romans, now that you ask me, if you begin at verse 16, it says, as much as is possible, live at peace with each other. So if you were to ask me the core of the biblical teaching, if it is grasped in the proper way, it would see the reduction in violence. Unfortunately, people who have an awareness of some of what is in the Bible tend to want to capitalize and use the Bible in an opportunistic way, and would therefore pick and choose, cherry pick passages and misquote biblical passages and intents of the Bible to suit their own taste. And yeah, I would not sit here and say that there are not people out there who have very slight allegiance to church or to Bible, but would want to conveniently evoke biblical passages to support their own male dominance in their little corner of their house. Yeah, so I know there are people who would say I wear the pants around here. There are people who would say that I am the head of the home and use that to be a doctrine of dominance. And the Bible doesn't, when the Bible says that, the Bible is not teaching a doctrine of dominance. But I see people capitalizing, co-opting, and hijacking passages of scripture to use it to support their own violent behavior. I would have none of that, because the Bible promotes peace.
And Dr. Richards, one of the things we have to pay attention to as well, it's because sometimes it's not necessarily violence, and as you say, would cherry pick verses or passages from the Bible to support their behavior. It's not necessarily violence, but control, and which is a form of abuse. So it's not physical violence, but wielding the Bible and Bible verses to control the life in your house and your wife and your children. That's a form of abuse.
And when that happens, it is wrong, because there's a misappropriation of biblical passages. Galatians 3 and verse 28 is a great passage on equality, the equality of all people. I make particular reference, especially when I'm doing weddings. I make particular reference to Genesis chapter 2 and beginning at verse 18, where God says that this is one of the passages actually that is taken out of context and misused, that a woman is the helpmeet. Or helpmate. Actually, they said a woman is a man's helpmate. And the etsakanizo, the Greek with Hebrew derivative of that term is not so much that somebody is another man's helpmate, but it is helpmeet in the sense that the two are suitable to each other. So they meet. And the Bible from the very get-go in Genesis teaches that men and women are meet. And that's not bad English. When I say men and women are meet, that's the old way of saying men and women are equal. And when God made woman, he said, Etsakanitso, this is somebody who is meet. This is some MWT. This is somebody who is the equal of man. And so that is the teaching of the Bible, that women are equal to men. And I've heard people, and even within, I've heard people say that a woman is a man's helpmate, and that perpetuates this idea of superiority of the male and inferiority of the female, and the Bible does not teach that at its core. I don't want to do a Bible study on the matter, so I will just leave it right there.
No, but it's very important that you make.
I know, I understand.
Because you two, I have met
it's
people
important.
who say, this is my wife, she's my property.
And
wow,
Miss Batiste, but a lot of that is not biblical. A lot of that is legal history. Legal history and legal precedent actually have set out laws, and you are aware of this, that have actually deemed women to be property. I'm not saying here in St Vincent, but I've studied. We have inherited.
No, well, I mean,
women have
if
been.
You're going to get into it, like, I mean, if we're going to get into it, let's get into it. Like, we're
women have been
post-colonial country. Like, women and children are chattel.
Yeah, women have been property legally for a long time. Not
A
biblically,
long
but
time.
legally.
You're your father's property, and then you're your husband's.
Yeah. So we need to address
one man.
Just now, I want to
society and how that informs what is going on in our society.
Yeah, exactly.
Dr. Alvarez, I saw your eyes moving. Tell me, what's your thoughts on this?
No,
and while you're
because
touching on this, I want you to also touch on what Miss Branch raised as it relates to things like corporal punishment. Do you, from your experience as a psychologist, do you see that connection? What's the connection? Give me your views.
There are so many connections, and I mean, it
Before
even
we
ties
go on
into
our
what I
next
was
break,
thinking around when Dr. Richards was talking. Like, if we really want to get into it, let's get into it. Let's talk about it from a historical standpoint. We are a country that was colonized. we were populated by people who were enslaved, who were oppressed, who were indoctrinated. And a lot of the things that we do and a lot of the things that we think come from the imaginations of the people who did those things to us. And we perpetuate them even into the present day. Corporal punishment is a very nice example. Why would you ever hit somebody to get them to do what you wanted them to do? If you really sit down and think about it for even a little while, you're like, that doesn't make any sense. But yet we do it. Why? Because we learned it. That's how you get compliance. But that's the thing. Like, I really love that Pastor Richards was using the words peace, love, kindness, because I feel like I hear a lot about respect and politeness and manners. Respect and politeness and manners are not the same as kindness. And there's a lot of people who put a lot of stock into being respectable who aren't particularly kind. So in terms of how corporal punishment leads into things, let me not digress too much, Mr. Jackson. Like, when children are exposed to harsh parenting, it does a host of things to them. It teaches you lessons about the importance of your emotions, whether or not you can show emotion. What you're crying for? I'll give you something for cry for. You're crying? Or if you don't cry, bad too. Bad. It's also bad. It's like, oh, you're big now. You're a man. Oh, you ain't gonna cry. Right? So you're already instilling this idea that like emotionality is something that you're not supposed to have and that you're punished for it. And also that if you want somebody to do something and you can't get them to do it, you hit them. You're learning that lesson. If you're a boy, you may be learning exactly how to hit somebody in future. If you're a girl, you may be learning how to take a lash. And on top of which, I mean, like it actually affects how children develop neurologically. Like adverse childhood experiences influence your physical development. Children who are traumatized stop growing. Yes. It's that severe. It is a traumatic experience to be beaten, right? But it affects your interpersonal relationships. It affects your physical development. It affects your ideas about relationships. Because think about it. When you're born, you don't know anything about being human. You're relying on the adults around you to teach you, well, what does it mean to be a person? And what does it mean to be in society? And what does it mean to be in relationship with other people? And if what your parents teach you is that part of being in a relationship with other people is to be in pain, imagine learning that at like as a toddler or before the age of 5, when children are so neuroplastic, when they're like little sponges, and how that shapes their ideas about the world going forward. There are studies linking adverse childhood experiences to a host of terrible life outcomes, including death, early, untimely death. We shouldn't hit children. We just shouldn't. It's not right.
How do you balance that with? And I actually had this situation that I had to. Well, I won't call it a situation. Experience that I dealt with recently, where a young lady, 21 years old, her boyfriend grabbed her by her hand, and she immediately broke up with him. And her statement to me, because we're close, and her statement to me was this: he is not my father. I understand that I got punished from my father, but my father also told me that as an adult, no one has the authority to do that, because I've never seen my father do that to my mother. So, I mean, how do we find the balance of that, where there are people who grew up understanding parents can discipline, even let's beg to differ as it relates to whether corporal punishment, we're looking at it from that angle, that my parents can discipline me, but is it safe to say that automatically equates that because my dad spanked me, it's okay for my husband to beat me? Or have you ever heard the impression, you are not my father? doesn't that show any sense of understanding that there's a role for a parent, contrary to me as an adult, a role, I'm an adult, you don't have that authority? That's I want to
I
bring
have
the
heard
whole
people
thing
make that
into play.
distinction.
Yes.
I'm not saying that it's impossible to make that distinction. I'm just saying, I mean, personally, I wouldn't run the risk. Like, why would I put somebody in the position of having to make that distinction? It should just be that we treat people with kindness, and part of kindness is that we don't hit.
All right. You want to chime in, Ms. Batiste? I haven't heard you in a little bit.
You just heard me
before we go on our last break.
Well, you see, a lot of it has to do with, as you say, the exposure and the way that families deal with disagreements and disputes within the family setting. And sometimes you do have persons who will figure, let me go to Mr. So-and-so in the village, and he will make a solution. He'll help us out with a solution. And sometimes that solution is not the solution the family needs. And it compounds the problem. And it becomes, as Dr. Elvis is saying, this generational thing goes on. And then there's somebody, girls are saying, imagine my mother went through this and I'm going through it. And now look at what is happening with my children. And the way to break that cycle is this education and the speaking out and having these couch moments. And I've been listening to one of the psychologists lately when they're talking about things relating to like body shaming and the things that men say to women to make them feel less of a woman or less attractive, and what that does to the mental health, and then the relationships they get into because somebody else. Is a whole roller coaster of things that happen. And it is my hope that we can have more educational programs and awareness programs. The way that we learn how to use all this technology, let's use it in promoting things of better will, of better ways of living, of better living. I was so happy when I see a lot of young women, particularly, doing psychology and becoming psychologists and psychiatrists and so on. So because they do a lot of the nurturing in their homes, because sometimes the fathers are not there, and even the fathers are there, they're absent. These are the people that bring up the children. And so I'm hoping that we can use this new barrage of knowledge that we've gathered from people like Dr. Alvis and so on, that education process, because remember, it's called, there was a TV program called the re-education of somebody. We have to do a lot of re-education so that people can understand the value, the personal value of the human being, the personal value that even the young boys, we can't leave them behind. We have to somehow help to embrace them and teach them that you don't box somebody because you disagree with them, because that's what they see happen at home. That you have to learn to be respectful of another person's argument. You have to learn not to curse somebody because you don't agree. But of course, you get a barrage of it now in social media, and you have to more or less be attuned to leave that aside and let me not disturb the balance of my mind. But I know that we have a lot of work to do. And sometimes people don't want to hear this part about the work. And there's the listening, there's the talking, there's the understanding, and persons who have the professional tools. We're going to have to do a lot of this work, because we can't allow things to go much further. Those of us that have an audience, those of us that have a profile, we have social capital, we have cultural capital, we have political capital. We have to use that to help this country to start to heal, to help people to understand how do we build a better society? What do we do to help women, to help men? Because we can't just, it's not one side of the scale, there are two sides. So we have to try and work on both sides of that scale. We have to do it. We do other things, so I don't think it's beyond us. It's a challenge. It's a mountain. But people climb Everest. We can do it.
We can make a start.
We can make a start.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as Ms. Batiste said, just one quick thing, Mr. Jackson, as Ms. Batiste said, we have to involve the men and boys. We have to bring them, they have to be on board, because they have to challenge each other. They have to challenge each other on their behaviors, the misogyny, the harassment, the jokes, the memes that they share on Facebook that bring down women. All of that is part of the education.
But I would say part of that, in terms of involvement, I'm so glad that we've gotten to this part of the conversation. So I'm going to use that feminist. I'm a proud feminist. I'm happy to say it to anybody. And some people see that as an anti-male project, and I say it's quite the opposite, because gender discrimination and gender hurt men as well. If we have more expansive ideas about acceptable womanhood, it means that you can have more expansive ideas about acceptable but as well. It means, imagine, little boys can have best friends, little boys can have emotional outlets, little boys can express themselves and maybe be able to have outlets for the issue, don't involve exacting pain on people, because that's part of it too. Like I'm at this point middle-aged, and there are people who I know, who I grew up with, all of their emotional capacity has been outsourced to their mate. And so if something happens in a relationship, all of a sudden they don't have a conduit for that. There are men who are lonely. They don't know how to have a conversation about something that isn't sports or cars or an activity. They're not talking about their feelings. So where do those feelings go if they don't have a girlfriend or a wife? Men need to be able to talk to each other. And really starting off out of little boys' social outlets when they're very, very young. Like, it's hard to find a boy older than maybe around 12, 13 who will say, oh, I have a best friend. Girls talk about having best friends all the time. Little boys, not so much. But it's because it looked at funny. You hang out with boys all the time. I'm to you. Then we get questioning their sexuality.
Yeah.
Right. Now, let's pause there. We're going to take our final break. We're going to get some announcements from our sponsors. And when we come back, we're going to wrap this up. It's a lot to dive into. And I think we have only touched the tip of it, but it's part of the conversation, right? So we're going to be right back, and then we're also going to be taking some questions from those who have been listening. We'll be right back in the press room.
I'm Shanika John, Chief Health Promotion Officer acting in the Ministry of Health, Wellness and Environment. Since St Vincent and the Grenadines started administering the COVID-19 vaccines, we've encouraged persons from different age group, different risk factors to get vaccinated. For those persons who have contracted the COVID-19 virus, vaccinated or unvaccinated, the severity and the impact of the virus is significantly different. If you've not yet considered getting the vaccine, I encourage you to do so today. Get vaccinated.
Welcome back. Welcome back. We're in the press room and we have Dr. Alves, the Honorable Ms. Batiste, Ms. Gail Branch, Dr. Richards, and we've been diving into the whole concept of moving beyond the orange as we look at domestic violence against women and violence on a whole. If I'm to ask you guys to give us the one or two things that you believe is most crucial that you would want to see done to move the conversation beyond the orange and have lasting impact. What's most important in your minds?
I would say to begin with, I would part of my frustration is I find it very difficult to have a meaningful conversation with anyone about solutions, to be quite fair, to be quite honest. Meaningful solution gets lost in the euphoria of goodwill. People mean well, but we are offering more bishop solutions to something that is socially destructive. A lot of the well-meaning and good intent solutions have very little to absolutely divorced from causation. And you can't meaningfully address or attack anything if you divorce solutions from causation. And to be honest, not just violence against women, which is a niche area, but violence in general have multi-causal factors that plug into it. And it is kind of unfair to isolate any one of them. But at the very least, I can say this, Mr. Jackson and panel, that most of the solutions that I hear are absolutely divorced from causation. And it befuddles me. It just blows my mind that you want to offer, for example, penal solutions to biological causation. There's a lot of correlation between, for example, some of our biological function in testosterone, some of the chemicals that work towards aggression within man, brain abnormalities and all of that. I mean, committing violent crime and some of the heinous crimes that are committed, that is not normal. All right, guys, that's absolutely not normal. And so there has to be something within brain functioning, and it is not like this has not been studied. It is not like these things are not known facts. Dr. Alves, you can attest. These are known facts. These are biological causation. What are you going to do, lock up with somebody because you cannot solve the matter from a biological perspective? A child that has issues with aggression, a lot of it ADHD and ADHD related. And once this is recognized early, the answer is not to punish the child, put the child out of the classroom or whatever. The way we try to deal with these problems when they begin to raise their head early is just we penalize our way out of everything, which is nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. We have solutions that are not connected to causation. One of the major correlates related to crime has to do with education deficiency. And please understand where I'm going with this, because again, anyone who is halfway serious about looking for solution and looking at causation would see that there's in people who commit certain crimes, there's a significant deficit in the person's ability to do critical thinking, to collaborate, to listen, just some soft skills, self-acceptance, self-evaluation, anger management. I may have said that. There's significant deficit in some of the critical needs within our social education. But I've said, and those who listen to my program on other media have heard me say over and over and over again, Mr. Jackson panel, that what we are rewarding, we reward the accounts and the $500 with the math and the English and all of these things. And these things are not solving crime. I think that when we get serious about solutions to crime, we realize the significant correlation between this particular area of education deficit and begin to plug more and it is doable. It is not doable in 1 year and 2 years and 3 years. It is doable over a sustained period if we fill that area of deficit. But when we put one counselor in a school and two counselors in a school, or maybe two if we're lucky, gosh, we don't have enough people in school to deal with these in a targeted and sustained manner. We put more people to teach accounts. Causation. Look at causation before you look at solution. And Dr. Alvis, I will say this and then I will yield over to you. But I mean, biological causation, you can't use penal solution. Educational causation, you can't use penal solutions. Psychological, and there's much more I can say, but I'll just leave it at psychological. Psychological causation, and again, and those who have been students of mine in counseling would know that, and I mean, I'm not saying that there's a crime gene, don't get me wrong, but there is such a thing as sociopathic personality disorder. There's such a thing as antisocial personality disorder, Dr. Alvis. And with that come the disregard for a sense of right or wrong. This thing where you exploit others, it's there. You can punish somebody and get that out of them. This lack of empathy, this thing where you can actually derive a sense of euphoria from beating on others, that's a psychological problem. How are you going to punish your way out of that? But that's part of the body of things, causal factors. And if we're going to seriously address violence, we have to get out of this myopic mindset that punishment and legal solutions. We've got to look at the multiple causal factors, and whether it's education, again, there are many other causes I can talk about. Social scripting is a huge cause. Reward and punishment. I on my radio program this morning, I talked about Pavlov, and he didn't punish those dogs to condition them. It is how he rewarded them, the reinforcement. We have to understand, can't give morbid, sharp solutions. And most people, because they're so caught up in goodwill and meaning well, they're like, this is what we got to do, but they don't have a clue as to how we can, over a sustained period, long-term, effectively address crime, whether it's in St. Vincent or elsewhere. But we talk in St. Vincent now. And so until we get to this nexus of conversation, until we get to this point where we can meaningfully have real discussions about causation, I don't know that we can move meaningfully to solution.
Okay. Before we get to our next panelist to give your view, let me just get some of the comments and questions, or mainly comments. President Johnson said victims are afraid because somehow society seems to want to stigmatize and vilify rather than show sympathy or even empathy. And I think we touched on that. We touched on that in what we said. Are we prepared to interrogate the role of our society's patriarchal structure in this entire scenario? Where is female agency? So as I ask that question, who's going to go next? Well, Dr. Richards did say that he's handing the baton over
Dr. Alvis.
Dr. Alvis.
Yes.
So Dr. Alvis, when you're finished, you're going to hand the baton over to either Ms. Batiste or Ms. Branch. All right. Go ahead.
So I do hear the idea of, well, what about causes that are organic or causes that are biological? People who work in my field of study have been trying to tease apart nature and nurture pretty much forever, right? I tend to prefer to think about things from the standpoint of biological, psychological, and social interaction. So of course, a person may come with whatever their complement of biological particulars are in terms of their neurological wiring. For example, somebody who has ADHD, their actual neurological architecture is they're neurodiverse, right? But then there is psychologically what's going on with them. And then there's the society that they're born into. And those things all actually combine to create outcomes. And I think that there is a lot that we can do to actually influence things sociologically that creates resilience factors and actually mitigates some of what we see that people may be bringing biologically. I mean, some of the more, I guess, more thrilling types of things, like in terms of psychopathy or sociopathy, they're not that common of a diagnosis, to be honest with you. You know, a lot of crime comes out of both, you know, the conditions being good for it and opportunity. So there is a question of what can we do as a society within different spheres of influence that you have. I think Renee was saying this, like, recognize that every person has social capital, cultural capital, and some of us have more of those than others. Some of us have political capital, right? Now, I'm not saying that there is no one solution. So I'll start there.
Okay.
This type of problem, big social problem, multifaceted solutions are necessary. But the one that I feel like, well, I guess in response to Mr. Jackson's question, like the one thing that you want to say and would like to see happen, I would love to see people operating within their spheres of personal influence more so than they do currently. Values are called that because they're not just ideas. You have to actually live into them and you have to model them. And I would love to see more of that from people. I would love to see more of that. I'm going to very specifically call out the men in my life. I know a lot of men that I admire personally, professionally. I mean, with deference to Ms. Bowman's question about female agency, I want to hear more about, well, what would men like to do in order to make a better world? People are always laying, you know, the nurturing and bettering of the world at the feet of women. What do men want to do? You know, what do you want to do to make sure that you're raising sons that will go on to be kind, good, decent men, right? And at the same token, of course, those of us who are raising little girls, how can we raise little girls to be self-assured and to know how to accept and receive love that is healthy and to reject love that is unhealthy, right? There's parts to play for everybody. And I think that's what I'd like to see, less of an idea of like, well, what is some external body going to do? And which isn't to say that there isn't a place for legislation, for policies, for formal education. But a lot of what we can get done in terms of attitude, I think, and in like that, the type of sea change that we need actually comes at a grassroots level. And so that's what I would like to see. What are the conversations that you're having? You know, when somebody says something questionable that, you know, holds a kind of a gender stereotype in it, like, do you question it? Do you say to that person, like, you just tilt your head to the side and be like, can you say that again? Can you tell me how you got to that? Tell me more. You know, like I think over time I've gotten to that place where I'm not going to argue with you, but I'm gonna kind of Socratically question you. Like, okay, tell me, like, why do you think that? I think we need more of that in order to have, and I think that helps also with having some of the discourse that you're talking about, Dr. Richards, around like everything cannot be punitive. Some people are going to express ideas that are problematic or that are hurtful or harmful. How can we engage in discourse? Is that possible?
Thank you.
Because I don't like to spend my time yelling or shouting at people or talking over people, right? How can we have actual dialogue? That's what I'd like to see as well.
Who are you tossing the baton to?
Whoever wants to catch it. Who wanted?
All right. You're treating it like you're going to be throwing it like a bouquet.
Who's having
Well,
Galen.
may I please just because
Miss
I just
Branch,
want,
before you take it up, let me just some of the comments. Earl Bennett says, why is it persons have difficulty in saying I love you? Do you believe that this can impact negatively on the home? Or I guess they want to say, and somebody else made that comment, simple things of teaching young men to hear the words I love you. And I guess you're talking again from the home and creating that type of space of love and acceptance would go a long way. So you go right ahead, and we're gonna close off the comments with Miss Batiste.
So just to expand
tonight.
Just to expand on what Dr. Alvis was saying, it's a huge problem, it's a huge societal problem and cultural problem, which we should address on those terms as well. For example, we should start challenging the social norms. We should start challenging the cultural norms. And like I saw the question that Ambassador Bowman posed, because, we need to address the whole patriarchal construct of our society. But aside from all of that, it's getting involved and engaged on the individual level. How can each of us make a difference? How can each of us contribute to the solutions? Mentor somebody, mentor a boy, a girl, have conversations. Speak to girls about what a relationship should be. A relationship should be a safe space. I tell my son all the time, relationships require hard work, but they should not be hard. A relationship is a safe space that you and your partner, you and the person that you're in a relationship with can be. Share your skills. Help young people learn a skill so that they don't have to be economically dependent and have to remain in an abusive relationship because they can't support themselves. Get your community involved. Get the young men. As I said before, engage the men in your life, in your lives, and to expand on what Elisa said as well. Just on an individual level. Help with funds when you can. That's a big part. Fundraising activities, yes, a little bit helps. I can speak from personal experience. A couple of years ago, there was this horrific murder of this young lady in Park Hill, which is where I'm from, where her boyfriend killed her in front of her. She was holding a baby and she had another daughter. And I reached out to the people in my circle and further afield, and was able to raise funds that provided support for those children from April of 2020 to December of 2021, that I was able to help them. So violence and abuse has a long tail. We have to find ways of supporting the victims. We have, aside from helping with prevention, we have to find ways at individual levels to help the victims as well. It's just a matter of being a good neighbor.
Yeah. So, Ms. Batiste, before you close, one of the other comments that was made is that people are saying, Kimberly says that we need to get men to be able to accept rejection without leading to violence. And Annette was saying we need to tout and keep to push the need for counseling. People need to get help to deal with issues that they're going through. There needs to be that type of outlet. Yeah. So what one thing for you, Ms. Batiste?
There is the counseling and the outreach. I'll tell you something. I will listen very carefully to what Dr. Richards was saying. And sometimes because of where you are or maybe located, people are not aware of a lot of things that happen. And I know that some departments don't even blow their own horn in relation to the work that they're doing. Some of it has to do with the question of preservation of privacy and rights of privacy, the confidentiality that is attached to that. There is work being done on diagnostics. When you talk about the punitive measures, it's a balance that sometimes is being struck, but one part is very visible and the other part is not that visible. The deterrent and building from the bottom up, because there are persons who have benefited. They went into prison and they have benefited in there from the work that is being done. There are social reports that are done from time to time to see how people who are either long or short term serving in prison. There are some people who are recidivists, and you can try your very best with them. They are recidivists. You see it, you read it in the paper. He's been here 15 times before the magistrate for the same thing. And when you talk to those kind of people, why are you doing this? Well, I have no money. Why you don't have any money? Why I ain't working. What job do you want? And then you start to nail down as you drive down. It's called the diagnostics and the profiling of that type of individual who has done a particular wrong. And you'll be amazed at where that wrong started. It's not that person, you know, it was an adult. And so there is some work being done in that particular area. Some of it is not as well known as it should be. And as again, I want to compliment the family court in the amount of work that they do in counseling. There's those community development workers who do a lot of work along with some teachers, because I know of when teachers miss children in school, they either call community development or they go into the community to go and look for these children. Why are they not at school? What is the problem? What is happening? And you catch it in that 5-10 year period that I have observed certain teachers when I was an MP, what the things that they have done. Now, there's some people who don't go to that length, but there's some people who will go to that particular length to see and help and save some people. But we can't do all of it, and a lot of us can't do much of it that we would like to do. But as a society, we have to have constructs that deal with punishment, with deterrence, and also with rehabilitation. The system has to have those particular pillars. And as a small country, sometimes we think that we have the world of money and we keep forgetting. We're not even the size of the people in the F train. We're not even that, not many people on the F train going home late at night. And so we tend to forget that 15,000 of our people are over the age of 60, 65, and that 40,000 of them are between the age of 0 to about 14, 15, 16. And so they're not generating income. They're not producers of income. And so you have to find different mechanisms to try to deal with some of these problems that will arise. And as if we are paying attention to what's happening around this regionally, I was speaking with my some colleagues in another island, Eastern Caribbean island, and it was like putting a mirror and saying, oh, so you have that. Oh, so you have that. So we realized so many of the problems are similar. But sometimes we get to do little exchanges, but we need to do more. We need to have a resurgence, a revival of that spirit of community. As somebody was saying, the village has disappeared and nobody is caring anymore. What caused that to happen? What happened? And so I depend on these young, brilliant minds that are coming back, like Andrea Gaines Moyes and Dr. Alvis and Dr. Joselle Miller and all these young people who have returned. And so they have some of these tools to help with these, to provide these coping skills that this emerging population that we are facing, while we're making tremendous strides with young people doing aerospace engineering and the child Scott at MIT. And there's that branch that make us feel so well about being Vincentians and coming from this small rock in the ocean. We got to protect the rock as well. We got to watch the waves. It's not just climate change out there, but climate change up here as well. And Earl Bennett, yes, we should not be afraid to say, I love you. It's easy.
Well, on that note, yeah. Well, on that note, I really thoroughly enjoyed having you all. And I want to thank Dr. Richards, the Honorable Renee Batiste, Miss Branch, and Dr. Alves for joining us in the press room as we dive into going beyond the orange. And we hope that our discussion for this little while would have added some currency in dealing with this issue. So until next time in the press room, goodbye for now.
Bless you.